Okay, in the United States history, there's many colonies, 13 of them that were started. We're going to focus on two of them, like I mentioned before, Jamestown colony in present-day Virginia and Plymouth colony in present-day Massachusetts. Now, Jamestown colony, there's a few things to say about it. Other groups had come to the eastern coast of North America before coming to Jamestown or before establishing Jamestown colony. About 100 years after Columbus, a group of British had received permission from the Queen of England to try and establish a colony in a place called Roanoke, which is in present-day North Carolina. Their sole purpose in trying to establish a colony was to make money. Now, it didn't work out so well for them. They arrived, they started building, but they disappeared. Today we refer to them as the Lost Colony. We really don't know exactly what happened to them. Now, the Jamestown colony, in the early 1600s, another group of investors approached the King of England with a business proposal. They wanted to start a new business / colony called Jamestown in present-day Virginia. The group was to be led by John Smith. Now, if you remember him from the Disney movie Pocahontas, that was a very historically inaccurate movie, but it's a fun movie for kids to watch. When they got there, the only land they could find that wasn't already taken by Native Americans was an area with poor sandy soil and also in a marsh area. Water was unsafe to drink. Not all were willing to work. In fact, 45 of the people were identified as, quote, gentlemen and would not consider working with their hands. Ultimately, they weren't too concerned with the bad soil, though. They were there to make money by finding gold. Failing to pay attention to planting and tending to crops, nearly every member of the original colony died from disease and starvation. The winter of 1609 was a particularly harsh winter for them, and it was known as the quote-unquote starving time. There were reports of cannibalism. People had dug up graves looking for a food source, looking to eat dead bodies. It's pretty nasty. Things were really tough for them. One man was even burned at the stake as punishment for killing his pregnant wife so he could eat her for food. Ultimately, it was a terrible winter that they had. Now, of the original 200 or so settlers that were in Jamestown, that winter only 60 of them survived. There were more shiploads of others who were sent to prop up the dying colony. These were led by a person by the name of John Rolfe. Now, John Rolfe is famous for two things. The first thing he's famous for is marrying the Native American princess called Pocahontas. Now, ultimately, this marriage led to better relationships with the natives in the area. The second thing that he's famous for is he didn't look for gold. He said, we're going to start growing some things. And he was the first European to start planting tobacco in any colonies at all here in the United States. Now, these next groups of settlers in Jamestown, they did focus on planting tobacco, and what they wanted to do was to not use it for their own consumption necessarily, not to survive on it, but as a business venture so they could make money by selling it back to England. They made so much money, they began planting larger and larger areas of land, and they did actually financially, they were quite successful. They raised a lot of tobacco. This eventually will lead to the demand for cheaper labor to plant and to harvest these crops. This leads to captured Africans being used as slaves for the first time here in our colonies. And ultimately, within a few generations, this leads to huge plantations in the southern, what we call today the southern states, and they end up relying on slavery to make the economy work. They couldn't continue to pay people to produce this tobacco and make enough money, but they could become very wealthy once they purchased the slaves. They wouldn't have to pay them for their work. This last slide I want to show you is a picture of Jamestown. This was painted by Keith Rocco. He's for the it was made for the National Park Service. This is what Jamestown probably looks something like this by the mid-1700s, after the colony began growing tobacco and became financially successful. And it's hard to see, but if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can see some slave that's being traded here. So it didn't take long once they began growing tobacco to become a financially successful colony here for England.